privilege and pleasure to move this motion on a very serious issue of consular support for British citizens. And I would like, if the Chair will allow me, to share experience of someone whose loved one has died abroad. So you've gone to Paris for the weekend. It's your husband's birthday and you're going to celebrate. You get to Paris and you're having a lovely time. Your son and daughter and their partners are with you. Between the restaurant and the hotel, your husband is attacked at random. He didn't see it coming. None of you did. And he was so brutally beaten that he was taken to hospital and put on a life support machine. Your son and son-in-law were also attacked and taken to hospital. You arrived at the hospital to find you could not understand the language, and you were asked to sign a document, but it wasn't in English. You couldn't read it and you were panicking as it related to your husband's care. You're in shock. It's night time. It's dark. What do? You decide to call the British Embassy. They'll know what to do. But it's closed because it's Saturday night and it's not open again until Monday. Monday comes and your husband's life support machine has been turned off. You didn't get a choice in the matter. The rules are different in France to the UK. You are devastated. Your husband, whose birthday you were coming to celebrate, has been murdered. You managed to contact the embassy on Monday and they tell you they're sorry to hear what's happened, but they can't help you and you'll need to find a lawyer. They agree to send you a list though, and you get a piece of paper with some names in French and phone numbers. You ring the first one, you try to explain your husband has been murdered, and the lawyer on the end of the phone tells you he's too busy to take the case. Your daughter calls the next one, and they ask for €1,000 up front and all the documents in the case. You go to the hospital where you're handed a report, but you can't read it because it's in French. You call the embassy who say they don't deal with translation. You'll need to organise that yourself. You go to the police station where no one can tell you what will happen next and whether the criminals who attacked your family will be traced. You tell them what happened and are asked to sign a document that you can't read. You ask for a translation and they can't help you. You need to get back home because you can't afford to stay. You don't want to leave your husband and your son because he's still in intensive care. Someone present at the embassy agrees to drive you to the airport. They tell you that's not part of their job description and they're doing it as a favour because they feel sorry for you. But please don't mention it to anyone. You get back to London, queuing for the flight check-in. You have 2 suitcases, yours and your husband's. When you get to the desk, you're told there'll be a charge because you have extra luggage. On the flight, someone from the airline announces a welcome on board and says, "We hope you enjoyed your trip." You get home, you call the Foreign Office, someone asks you to explain what's happened, you give them the details and you have to relive it all. They say that they aren't the person who can help, but someone will ring you back tomorrow. The next day, no one phones. You call back and get someone else who asks you to go through the story again. They ask if you had insurance and whether you plan to get the body home or not, and if you don't have insurance, you'll have to find the money for repatriation yourself, but you'll need to speak to a funeral director about that. But what they do is send you a bereavement pack. What's your email address? You call the funeral director to go through organising repatriation after you've called your insurance company. And imagine, if you will, for just a second, that you don't have insurance and instead you just have to set up a crowdfunding page asking any generous members of the public for enough money to get your partner back so you could have a funeral. You were due back to work on Monday. You don't know what your name is or what day of the week it is, let alone go back to work. So you arrange to see your GP who signs you off sick. You can't work and your husband was the main source of income in your household. The French lawyer is asking lots of questions and then spending a lot of time on your case. And you want justice, so there's legal fees, travel and a lot of stress and trauma ahead. You feel so alone. This can't be right. You're at home now and you're watching the news of a young girl who's fallen from a balcony in suspicious circumstances overseas. The comment from the news presenter says, "We asked the Foreign Office for comment, who said we are assisting the family at this difficult time." You wonder what assistance they're getting that you're not. You decide to set up your own charity to ensure families are supported in the future. It's too late for yours, but God forbid some other poor family has to suffer this alone. Let's make sure this doesn't happen again. Murdered Abroad was set up in 2001 by Eve Henderson. Deaths Abroad You're Not Alone in 2013 by Julie Love, whose son Colin tragically drowned in water that was deemed safe off the coast of a Venezuelan island. The Kirsty Maxwell charity was set up by my constituents, Brian and Denise Curry, Kirsty's parents, who want to help others who suffer such a traumatic loss of a loved one abroad. And the Lucy Blackman Trust, formed after the brutal attack of Lucy Blackman in Japan in 2000. The Jessica Lawson Retreat was set up by her family as a retreat for those bereaved after Jessica tragically drowned on a school trip in France in 2015, and they also continue to campaign on water safety issues. The British Rights Abroad group was set up by the families of Nazanin Zacharie Radcliffe and Matthew Hedges to campaign and represent families of those held illegally abroad. These are services, Madam Deputy Speaker, set up by families devastated by the loss or incarceration of a loved one, now plugging the gaps of government. They do incredible work, and I pay tribute to them, and they will always be a place for charities and organisations like theirs, but they should not have to be picking up the pieces of a government's failings. The experience I just shared with you, I'll be very happy to give way to London.
I thank the member for giving way, and I'm actually sorry to interrupt a very powerful speech that she's making, and thank her for getting this debate. She knows the case of my constituent, Nazanin Zacharie Radcliffe, very well, having spoken in several debates in support of her release. She may be aware that Nazanin Zacharie Radcliffe was granted diplomatic protection by this government in 2019, but 3 years on, almost nothing has been done to use the diplomatic protection that was bestowed upon her to bring her home. The government has been unwilling to assert its right to consular access to Nazanin, challenge Iran's unlawful behaviour at the International Court of Justice, or use their right under the Vienna Convention to request private consular meetings with the Iranian regime. So does my honourable member friend agree that the government risks undermining UK's diplomatic protection by failing to utilise it in my constituent's case?
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and I pay tribute to the work that she has done on behalf of Nazanin, Richard and their family. And I wholeheartedly agree, and I will come on to some of those points in my speech. And the experience I just shared with the Chamber is just one of the many devastating accounts that I've heard since I started working on this issue. Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to take a moment, if I may, to thank the Backbench Business Committee and all who are speaking today and who have supported this work. I want to give thanks to Eve Henderson of Murdered Abroad, of Julie Love of Deaths Abroad, You're Not Alone, of Redress, Miles Manning, Stuart's Law, the British Rights Abroad Group, and all who have contributed to today's preparation and who in their own ways advocate for different parts of the broader issue we are debating. I would also like to thank, if the House will indulge me for just a moment, my own constituency team who have worked tirelessly on this issue. When we set up the all-party group, we didn't deploy an organisation to support us because we felt the issue was too sensitive. So my own team have taken evidence and worked on this issue. Marcus Woods, Sabrina Rossetti, Chloe McClellan, Adam Robinson, and specifically Stephanie McTighe, my Chief of Staff, and Michelle Roger, my former comms manager. Michelle passed away from cancer in August this year, and she believed passionately in this work and in this issue. She is much missed by all in my team. Madam Deputy Speaker, when we founded the all-party group on Deaths Abroad and Consular Services and took evidence from over 60 families and 30 organisations, Michelle was very much at the heart of this work. Forgive me. She sat in on every session, diligently recording and taking note of the devastating experiences and making sure that they were properly reflected in the report that we wrote and published at the end of 2019. And why did we do that? Because, like all of you across this House, I have constituents who have been left devastated by the murder, suspicious death, incarceration or loss of a family member abroad. And in their time of most desperate need, they faced a lack of support from the Foreign Office. Julie Pearson was killed in Eilat, Israel in 2015, and Kirsty Maxwell was killed in Benidorm, Spain in 2016. They were two devastating constituency cases of young women taken in their prime in the most distressing and violent ways imaginable, and their families were left without the support they needed. Them coming forward to me to get support highlighted the issue to me. So I come to this debate and indeed these issues in genuinely the spirit of cooperation, as a critical friend. I genuinely want to work with government to make these things, the system better for families, for consular staff, for civil servants and for all whose lives are touched by this issue. And it is those families who are really at the heart of the APPG's work, and I want to thank all of them for the time they have spent with my team and I. They have given evidence, they have shared their traumatic experiences, and they live with a huge gap in their lives. Family members of those who are killed overseas without travel insurance to cover repatriation are in many cases left to crowdfund to repatriate the body of their loved one. Every time I see one of these crowdfunders pop up, Madam Deputy Speaker, my heart sinks, because I just know, from having spoken to the families that we have worked with, what they are facing. If your loved one is murdered overseas, it's estimated that it could cost anything up to £60,000. Criminal injuries compensation is only available if the murderer was in the UK, or unless the murder abroad was by means of a terrorist attack. And to be clear, there are only around 300 suspicious deaths abroad every year. Obviously, that number has been significantly different recently because of the pandemic, but of course, as things open up or don't, depending on where we will be, we have to recognise the challenges that are in front of us. And the House and those watching may be interested, and indeed glad to know, that terror attack victims are given an immediate payment of around £3,000, and then, I believe, further payments further down the line. And the repatriation is handled and paid for by the government. And I want to recognise that we have not taken evidence from victims of terror attacks, and I understand that many have raised concerns with the level of support in what we can only imagine are some of the most devastating of circumstances. In the many families we spoke to, we heard of spiralling costs because of need to pay for translation of documents, cost of legal representation, accommodation and travel. And Dame Vera Baird also recognised this in her 2019 report, Struggling for Justice, when she recognised those issues and the need for financial support for victims' families. So I ask the Government, can murder victims overseas please get parity with terrorist victims, and the Criminal Injuries Compensation Scheme amended accordingly? Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, if we can provide those services when someone is killed in a terrorist attack, why can we not offer them to those who are killed in suspicious circumstances abroad? Those services are there. Let's extend them. And can I ask the FCDO and the Ministry of Justice, who fund the Victim Support Homicide Service, please make transparent the assessment about who gets help and what that looks like? Because at the moment, families fall down the gaps of eligibility far too often and are re-traumatised by the process of just seeking help. The FCDO states that in its guidance that there is no legal right to consular assistance. All assistance provided is at our discretion. It does beg the question then, that given these are our citizens, these are our own folk, why would we not offer that service on a mandatory and consistent basis? What are the arguments for not offering it? Because the former Minister for Asia, Mark Field, said consular assistance is central to our work at the FCO. So these two things, that consular assistance is central to the FCDO's work and that it has no obligation to provide it, makes it seem that the Foreign Office is somewhat conflicted within itself about what it offers to its own citizens. So I'll ask the Government, will it enshrine in law a right to consular assistance, and if not, why not? Because our citizens need clarity and they need transparency. After all, the first duty of any government should be to protect its citizens. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, please excuse me. A lot has been made of global Britain and about Britain's greatness. It's not so great, however, when it comes to helping its own citizens. And we have evidence that families and indeed consular staff are left without the right help, resource or support to help them and deal with the death or detainment of their loved ones in their darkest hour. Only this week we've heard of the gross failings of the FCDO during the evacuation of Afghanistan. In 2019, it was reported that in the last 30 years, the number of Foreign Office staff has fallen by more than 1,000. In 2015, the Foreign Affairs Committee said in a report that budget cuts and low pay at the Foreign Office are endangering the UK's global role and could have a disastrous and costly effect on the government's ability to make informed judgments on critical issues, and that the cuts imposed on the FCO since 2010 have been severe and have gone beyond just trimming fat. Capacity and now appears to be being damaged. So fewer people are under greater pressure and doing more of the work with less resources. That is terrifying. And the staff need the help and support so they can do their job properly, Minister. So for those families of loved ones, but also for staff in your own service, the bereavement pack, please make these changes, because the bereavement pack that the Foreign Office provides does not say that if you're killed in suspicious circumstances abroad, you may well fall through a gap. Even the murder manslaughter team at the FCDO won't be able to take your case. It will be left with a general country casework team staffed by junior members of the Foreign Office who may not have the relevant experience or resources to support a family. And for them, dealing with those cases must be incredibly difficult and traumatic. Now, the Foreign Affairs Committee review recommended in 2014 that the Foreign Office need an Access to Justice unit. Madam Deputy Speaker, that Access to Justice unit was renamed and became the Murder-Manslaughter team, purely because it was deemed too difficult to deal with cases of suspicious deaths. So if it's too difficult for a government department deploying thousands of bright minds, where does that leave an individual family who falls through the cracks?
Lost.
So I ask the government, will they revisit this Access to Justice unit or similar dedicated to cases of suspicious deaths overseas? I get how difficult these issues are. I worked for the US Department of State in their Edinburgh consulate, and I saw first-hand how hard it was being a consular officer. But I also saw prisoners being visited regularly and checked on, regardless of their crime, because it was the right thing to do. When a US citizen died, I saw families met at the airport, not as a favour to keep under the radar, because it was the right thing to do. I saw staff coordinating with local police and taking a compassionate and trauma-informed approach. The families we have met and taken evidence from, who I would dearly love to name all of them individually, but I just can't, I don't have time, have touched my team and I forever, and I would invite the ministers to spend some time in their company to understand and hear from them. I would also suggest that in the course of consular staff being trained, they should also do the same. My team had vicarious trauma training following the evidence sessions we held. That was recommended and it was necessary. I fear for the consular staff and the staff retention of the FCDO, particularly in the murder-manslaughter team, who are doing the very, very best they can in some of the most difficult circumstances. Who is looking after them and who is training them, and does it work for families? Only recently I heard of a family not being called back. There is clearly a staffing issue, an issue with levels of service. We have experienced and trained police, senior investigating officers and homicide teams, yet they are not being connected with families needing the benefit of their knowledge. We have lawyers and police officers offering their time pro bono to help these cases. The help is here in the UK and it is possible, but we are not doing more to join these people up. That costs nothing but makes a huge difference. So can I ask the government, will it work with the all-party group to explore working with professionals in this area across these islands to join them up with those who need the benefit of their knowledge? Lawyers' lists need quality control and people need more support. And for those imprisoned abroad and held illegally, many of these issues are similar and deeply distressing. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, finally, I would like to touch briefly on those who are imprisoned and detained illegally abroad. And I know many of my colleagues from the Western Bartonshire and Glasgow North have worked on issues and fought hard for their constituents, as has the Honourable Lady who's not in her place now for Hampstead. And this is why a legal right to consular assistance is so important for them. I know others will touch on this, but I want to pay tribute to the founding members of the British Rights Abroad group, who have experienced their loved ones being held abroad. Richard Radcliffe and Daniela Tajida have fought valiantly for their loved ones. Nazanin is still, as we have heard, being held in Iran, away from her daughter and family. And although Daniela's husband, Matthew Hedges, is now home from being held in the UAE, his experience of illegal incarceration was horrific. I have spent time with Daniela. I have heard what Matthew went through when he was held in a windowless room, when he was force-fed drugs that have left long-term mental and physical damage. And Daniela was left to fight for Matthew alone with very little support from the UK government. She was advised not to go to the press, but then left completely isolated. That was a completely unacceptable situation, and if she had had the right consular support, I genuinely believe she and Matthew would not have been as damaged and as traumatised as they have been. There are more than 2,000 British prisoners abroad. More than half of them are currently being held without a trial. Like Jagtar Singh Johal, the constituent of my honourable friend, who's been held prisoner in India for nearly 4 years on unfounded terrorism charges, or Billy Irving, who spent 4 years in an Indian prison after being wrongly accused of carrying unlicensed arms and ammunition while he countered piracy, with the British government's authorisation and support. Madam Deputy Speaker, there is so much to say and so much to do on this issue, and so many lives lost and impacted, and so many still fighting for justice for their loved ones. I want to give others a chance to speak, but I also want to be very clear. I want to be clear with the government and I want to be clear with the families. I and my team will continue to fight on this issue, and we want to work with you to make this better. We will not give up. We will not give up the fight on this issue for those families and for their staff.
Yeah.
The question is, as on the order paper. Duncan Baker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I start by expressing my gratitude for the opportunity to take part in today's debate, and to the Honourable Member for Livingston through the Backbench Business Committee for bringing such an important debate to the Chamber. It's really important to be able to discuss this and probably specific cases that we have all come across, and that's exactly what I want to raise today. The case of one of my constituents, Dr. Ding Kol Dao Ding, British citizen who died in South Sudan in 2015. Now, his brother is a doctor working within the NHS as well as himself, and they live in Cromer on the North Norfolk coast. The circumstances surrounding his death and possible murder remain, more than 6 years later, unclear and unanswered. Dr. Ding was a highly qualified medical doctor and a brain surgeon, but also working within the NHS, and was, by all accounts, an extraordinary man. I know that his passing is felt as strongly today as it was 6 years ago. His friends and family have for many years now sought answers and justice, but they have neither. The British Embassy in Juba was seemingly making progress, with the former ambassador expressing his own concern over the death of Dr. Ding. However, the efforts to ascertain the facts surrounding the death of a British citizen have plateaued since that ambassador's end of tenure in 2017. It's my hope, by raising this case today on the floor of the House, much like other members, that Dr. Ding's case can now be revisited with renewed vigour and a concern to mirror that of his family and friends. I'm sure I speak for everybody here that to lose a son, a brother, or a loved one is one thing, but to do so in the absence of understanding and justice is a burden that no family should bear. Therefore, I want to ask the Minister, will she unequivocally assure me that everything can be done to help Dr. Ding's family and friends to receive the answers and the justice that they deserve? Would she agree to meet with me and the Ding family so that all can be done to support and help bring the very much needed closure to the late Dr. Ding's family and friends? Thank you.
Dave Dugan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to firstly thank my honourable friend, the Member for Livingston, for bringing this debate. It's a tremendously important issue that we need to discuss, and I think if we can do it on a cross-party basis, we need to do, if nothing else, impress upon the Minister the seriousness with which this type of case stands out in our bulk of casework. My constituent, David Cornick's son, was murdered in Thailand in 2019. He didn't commit suicide, as the official police report suggested. The official police report was extremely unconvincing and made no effort to be anything other than that. Much like my honourable friend's constituents' experience, there is an immediate and natural assumption that you'll turn to the Foreign Office. They'll know what to do. They've been here before. How could I understand how to navigate this myself? Who would? Who could? And so they turned to the Foreign Office, and at every turn, the door was politely, very, very politely closed. That there's nothing we can do, that's not our responsibility. Here's a list of lawyers. When I heard my honourable friend talk about the list of lawyers, my heart sank, because I've been through the list of lawyers merry-go-round with my constituent. 10 lawyers in Thailand, 6 of whom didn't respond, 2 of whom claimed they couldn't speak English, and the other 2 wanted £25,000 up front, £25,000 up front. I accept it's hard for the Foreign Office to find lawyers in every single country around the world, but they should accept it too and stop offering it. Because if you offer false, empty help, it's worse than no help at all. And that's the message I want to get through to the Minister. And the Minister is going to take to her feet, and I know what she's going to say. She's going to tell us that she understands. She's going to tell us these are very trying cases, not just for the families, but also for any MP who has to try and support constituents in these really very testing matters. And if that's true, and I'm sure it is, then take a look at the service that's provided now and change it. Because, you know, we live in a society now where people can, if they have the means, travel to all corners of the earth. Well, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office need to update their systems and processes to make sure that realistic. Just before I came to this debate, I read the guidance for going to Thailand, and I have to say it's nothing like my constituents' experience, which thankfully is exceptional, but not unheard of on the Thai Islands. And there's nothing there about investing in property and getting murdered for it so that your property can get embezzled by malign authorities who operate outside the rule of law, such as it is there. Nothing about that. Plenty about getting your drink spiked or your pockets picked. Let's get to the big issues. They're really serious. They are serious issues, Madam Deputy Speaker, but not as serious as a staged suicide and a completely disregarding police force and an investigation that wouldn't pass muster anywhere in the world. I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving me as if I haven't already said enough, but I feel compelled to speak specifically on the issue of Thailand, because we took a number evidence from a number of families whose loved ones died in Thailand, and the level of corruption and the lack of support was galling. They felt that things had moved on a little bit because the advice on the Foreign Office website had improved a little, but there is clearly a gulf, I'm sure he would agree, between that advice and the real experiences of our families in Thailand.
My honourable friends, absolutely right, Madam Deputy Speaker, and that's why I get back to my insistence that the Foreign Office will accept the request to look again at the way you seek to support, and that's a very small s, people in these types of circumstances. It would be far better to say to people to not compound their distress and devastation at the death of a loved one, to not compound that by giving the impression of a helpful organisation, when in actual fact, I'm sorry, they're anything but, certainly not in the experience of my constituents. So honesty is what needs to be rewoven through the support that the FCDO provide. The trauma of repatriating your loved one's body, the difficulty with death certificates, the impossible merry-go-round of post-mortems and other really challenging in any respect, but in this context, utterly horrifying. So I'll wrap it up there, Madam Deputy Speaker. I hope I've conveyed the seriousness with which I and other honourable and right honourable members view this, and I hope the Minister can assure us that something can change about this process. Thank you.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I first of all commend the Honourable Lady for Livingston for bringing this forward. I think all of us bring to the Chamber examples of where we have our constituents and who have happened along these lines. And can I say first of all to the Honourable Lady, her staff, she's every reason to be proud of her staff, by the way, and especially of that staff member who did much work, much commitment, and I know that you're proud of her, and I think we're all proud of her because of what you've done as well, so thank you. This topic is an emotive one. It's a emotive, Madam Deputy Speaker, because of the issues that it pertains to, the issues that each of us as local and elected representatives have. I can well remember a young man in my constituency coming into my office, I remember very well, broken by the news that his father had been found dead in Spain. It was under suspicious circumstances, Madam Deputy Speaker, and Daniel had no idea what to do whatsoever. It goes back to all the points that other members have made, and the honourable member for Angus made there just previous. It's knowing what to do. I would feel, and my constituents felt, that the British Consulate would be able to help but they weren't. So, under suspicious circumstances, Daniel had no idea to do what questions to ask, who to ask them of, and importantly, had no clue how to get his dad home. The pain and uncertainty was difficult to see, and harder still because we had no ready-made pathway to access to help him and his family. I would like to say that our office worked with the British Consulate, and I have to say honestly they were absolute professionals in what they were doing. But I would say, Madam Deputy Speaker, as well, that perhaps maybe they didn't have the knowledge or the expertise, because these things don't happen all the time, but whenever they do happen, I believe we must be able to respond. But it's all undoubted as well that their hands were somewhat tied and their roles were ambiguous. This debate today, I know what the Honourable Lady wants to do, and I know what I want to do, and I know what the other members who have spoken want to do, and the shadow, and we look to the Minister to have some response that can encourage us and give us some support and confidence in how the process will work from now on. We need to improve it, and with that in mind, there's absolutely a piece of work to be done to define roles and to provide the services that people need in time of trauma. Let's be honest, Madam Deputy Speaker, my constituent Daniel was in a really dark place, and he didn't know what to do, and I know the consulate were very helpful, but at the same time, it wasn't the consulate that got us out of the problem. And I think the Honourable Lady in her introduction had referred to that, and I think the Honourable Gentleman across the way also referred to it. So I'm very thankful for the work done by the Kevin Bell Repatriation Trust in Newry, who stepped into that breach and got Daniel's daddy home. They took care of the paperwork. We, as the MP and on behalf of the constituent, needed that Kevin Bell Repatriation Trust, who have done many of these. But when you're seeking for support or reaching out to try and find somewhere, they were there, and they liaised with the Spanish authorities, basically handled it for this terrified mourning young man. I dread to think, Madam Deputy Speaker, where that family would have been without him and without his repatriation trust. So I am thankful that this charity operated and helped in Northern Ireland to do what our consulate was unable to do. They had my thanks then, they have my thanks now, and in abundance today for all that they do to help people in this way. We've also in the past, and unfortunately, had others who have died in suspicious circumstances, or who died as a result of bad health or whatever. But the case is that we needed help from the consulate for that as well. And in many cases, it was the charities, it was the people outside that reached out to help. I'm just really conscious, Madam Deputy Speaker, that when it comes to this issue, we see the families firsthand, and we know the pain that's in their heart, and we know the anxiety and the worry that they have as they try to think, well, what are we going to do now? Honourable Lady, in her introduction, very eloquently and very powerfully told that story of her constituents and what the Honourable Lady for Livingston was able to do with her staff to try and help. The story I've told for my constituents forms the basis of my plea to government and ultimately to the Minister. I understand that the consulate cannot be accountable for the actions of every UK citizen on holiday, and neither could we expect them to. But there are situations in which we simply cannot abandon our citizens to do it alone. That's the thrust, I believe, of this debate, and that's why we look to the Minister for our response. To bring the bodies home, to search for answers, to get justice in these horrific, traumatic and very grieving circumstances. They don't have the money, they don't have the know-how, and often the presence of mind. And all honesty, I mean, in Northern Ireland, Madam Deputy Speaker, we've had those that disappeared, those who the IRA murdered and buried. Those families look to have a completion of their grief, if at all possible. We don't have the facilities within constituency offices to provide the help that is needed, And there's a breach, I believe, and a gap that needs to be filled by the consulate rather than charities who may or may not have scope and capacity to step in. Families want their loved ones home. They want to be able to lay them to rest. They want to be able to have some sort of a closure. They want to have them to be able to be buried under these incredible circumstances and under incredible pressure. So in deep grief, they need help. They need compassion. They need tender care. They need help through the process step by step as you try to deal with something that's incomprehensible and which you never expected in the holiday trip that you took to go away. So therefore, I believe it's important and central at this time that every effort is made. I very much look forward to the Minister's response. I know the Minister to be a compassionate and understanding lady. I know that. I also know that the Minister would be anxious, as we all are, to have a response that can give succour and support to our constituents, but also look to the future to others who may find themselves in this imponderable, incredible and difficult situation. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I understand that there is not a never-ending supply of finance and in this case, but I would suggest that qualified embassy staff need to be trained to that effort or that level, and yet it is a need that we must meet and find the finance to train the staff in the know-how how to deal with these cases in each embassy or in cross-embassy basis if there's other. I do find, Madam Deputy Speaker, an honourable lady from Livingston's introduction, which you referred to, you had a phone number to phone the embassy, but they weren't there. We're not being critical of the embassy, but on a Saturday night and over a weekend, which normally is when these things really happen, unfortunately, I think there has to be some sort of an answering machine or something in place where you can ring this number or ring another embassy or whatever it may be, that someone can be available to help out. And so again, Madam Deputy Speaker, I look forward to the Minister again to see just how that can be done. There are perhaps lessons that can be learned from dealing with other consulates and embassies of our friends and allies to ensure that there is always the know-how to look into these cases. The Honourable Lady for Hampstead, who was here earlier but is not here now, I don't think any of us in this House are not touched by her constituent story of Nazazine Sagari Ratcliffe and how she was given protection, but that protection unfortunately hasn't. It's not the Minister's fault, it's the Iranians' fault, let's be honest, but at the end of the day, consulate care and protection has to mean something, and we've got to have that in place as well. So can the Minister inform the House just how improvement in consular help can be achieved through training, through knowledge in that department, that we can learn something from all the grief that our constituents have told us about, all the things that we feel almost overwhelmed with, and how we deal with those things in a way that we can give some support and succour and comfort to those people. And the answer that I think the Honourable Lady also, I thought was a very telling point, and I would reiterate it again. And Honourable Lady referred to her staff. They were doing all these cases for their constituents, but all of those things that they were doing, Madam Deputy Speaker, had a traumatic effect upon their staff as well. I mean, who as an MP hasn't taken the story home from one of your constituents and worried about it for about 2 days? You know, we've all done it. You know why? Because we want to help people, and our staff want to help people. And so the counselling for the staff, counselling for the consular staff who have to reply and respond, I think that's important. So Honourable Lady has referred to it. I look to the Minister to have that as part of the response. I conclude with this, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm coming to the conclusion. It's just time's flying on. I'm proud to use a British passport. I will be prouder still when I renew my passport and can wave the navy blue British passport which demands entry in the name of Her Majesty. I know that I will not be abandoned as long as I have that passport, and yet too many of our constituents have felt abandoned. Too many families feel left to face alone. And that is why we must ask for change and become better at what we do through our Minister and through the British Consulate. And I believe we can and should do more to ensure that help is available in these dire circumstances for all of our citizens. It's for the citizens for our citizens who tomorrow may face this, and how we can do it better. Thank you so much.
SNP spokesperson Martin Doherty-Hughes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's always good to follow the Honourable Member for Strangford, though I do hope that his new blue passport will open up doors to which the issue in which we are discussing today, because even though they're made in France. Let me congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Livingston, and also their staff, their team. I hated the word staff. Their team, for the immense work that they have done on behalf of the all-party group, to which I must declare I am also a member, and also the all-party group for coming together in a cross-party sense to discuss an issue which crosses the desks of members of this House in a more regular way than it ever has at any point in time. But let me importantly thank those families which gave evidence to the all-party group, and specifically let me concentrate on the families of my constituents. Lisa Brown, believed murdered in Spain, is still missing, and Jagtar Singh Johal, who is being arbitrarily detained in the Republic of India, now for a 4th year. Let me take Lisa's family's case first. And I've been part of it since her sister and brother first came to me and my team. And their experience is, in some ways, not very dissimilar to the vast majority of those who seek the Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office's support for someone who we believe is murdered and missing abroad. Limited information via consular office in a location with a high percentage of UK nationals either living or on holiday. Scrabbling around for translators, scrabbling around for lawyers, all the while dealing with the trauma of a missing sister, presumed murdered, who has a young son left behind. Sadly, the case of Lisa is still open, and during this time Lisa's mother sadly died without the answers she and the rest of Lisa's family has required. And then there's the case of Jagtar Singh Johal, a case to which I hope the Chamber is well acquainted. Abducted in the streets of the Republic of India, with an accusation of torture against the state of India, an ally and a member of the Commonwealth. No charges yet placed. A consistent postponement by Indian judicial authorities every time it comes to court. And the familiar "we can't do this and we can't do that" approach over a broad swathe of the period of his detention. And, like many others, I've lost count, Madam Deputy Speaker, of the number of consular staff who were moved during the last 4 years of Jagtar's detention. Though let me put on the record once again my thanks to those staff in the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office who have went beyond the call of duty to support my constituent and his family, paid not appropriately, and who have been moved pillar to post. And I have to be very clear, for a lack of political leadership on this issue. I've also lost count of the number of Prime Ministers, Foreign Secretaries and Under-Secretaries, not only for Jagtar's case, but for every other case that the report mentions. In the last 4 years, we've seen 3 Prime Ministers, 5 Foreign Secretaries and 3 Under-Secretaries, which belies the issue of political leadership. So let me pay tribute to those families, to Lisa's family and to Jagtar's family. And what all the families in the report understand, and as my honourable friend, the member for Livingston, has already alluded to, and I hope the Minister takes it in a cross-party sense, is the requirement to consider the enshrinement in law to consular assistance. that murder victims and those considered murdered overseas get parity with victims of terror, and that the criminal compensation scheme is amended accordingly. That the Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office, and as again my honourable friend has alluded to, the Minister of Justice here in England, make targeted assessments of who gets help and what that looks like to assist the families, and more importantly, to inform the future consular service and actually its provision and the planning of the delivery of an improved service that members have alluded to. Because if you don't gain the facts, you can improve the service. We already heard that earlier today with the Honourable Member for Wrexham in their report into the treatment of women in the armed forces. If you don't do the groundwork, understand what's going on, you can't make change. And also publish an introductory range, but not, I have to say, an exhaustive list of what basic assistance families and individuals can gain from Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office online presence, about the process. What should you expect as a basic? There also needs to be an assurance of timely reviews of locally held legal representatives and translation services. Again, members have alluded to people picking up the phone to somebody who not only doesn't speak English but wants €25,000 up front. There needs to be a consistent review at least twice a year, but would leave that to the appropriate officials to recognise what needs to be done there to improve those basic access to information and legal and translation services. And fundamentally provide a substantial budgetary increase to enable consular support teams not only in Whitehall and not only in embassies, but in those consular offices where you find traditionally large numbers of UK and Northern Ireland nationals either living or holidaying. For example, in places in the eastern coasts of Spain. But lastly, let me, Madam Deputy Speaker, pay again. I will, yes.
I thank Honourable Friend for giving way, and I do want to tell him, I mean, the point he makes about Spain particularly and the tourist hotspots, as you would say, is a really important one. I went with my Chief of Staff, Stephanie, to Madrid and met with the Ambassador and met with the staff in the embassy and in the consulate who deliver the services, and they could see the value. They could see the opportunity of improving the services and improving communication and having a proper link-up. And it's one of the recommendations that we want to put in place as a protocol to make sure that people that are travelling from the UK to Spain, where the vast majority of tourists go, have a higher level of service, if you will, because that's where so many tourists go from Britain.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for the intervention, but I think it makes my point. If the United Kingdom government wants to be a global Britain, it's a global Britain of the 21st century, not of buccaneers going into the Caribbean or into the Indo-Pacific. It really is about recognising what's on the ground, what's happening to citizens on a regular basis. And as my honourable friend for Angus alluded to, it's not irregular to hear of these cases anymore. It's not the regular, but it's not irregular, and we, as members of this House, face these tasks on a more regular basis. But let me just finally pay tribute not only to the family of Lisa Brown and Jagtar Singh Johal, but all of those families mentioned in the report. And I do hope that the Minister will understand that it comes from a place of wanting to work together, that no other family is left without the access to appropriate support, and that no other person is left in a hospital, dead, and their family having to have crowdfunders to bring them home. That families are met if they're going to visit someone in prison, whether it be in the Republic of India, whether it be in Iran, whether it be in Australia or the United States. And finally, commend my honourable friend, the member for Livingston, for gaining this debate today.
Shadow Minister Catherine West.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a real delight to be here this afternoon contributing to this debate, and indeed to hear the way that the member for Livingston introduced her poignant remarks relating to her constituent and all the important work that the All-Party Group has done, and indeed the work that, of course, the member for West Dunbartonshire has done, not just through the All-Party Group, but on behalf of his now very well-known constituent to those of us in the House who have been here since 2015. I believe he was in the same intake as myself, listening to Jagtar Singh Johal's story, and I do hope that the Minister can give us some enlightened news in that regard. Quite rightly, whenever citizens face difficulty or are caught up in a crisis in any part of the world, they do look to the Embassy and the Foreign Office for support. And we've heard, for example, from the member for North Norfolk about the need that we have as members of Parliament as well, to have that reassurance that our constituents are being looked after when they're in trouble. We firmly believe that the government always has a moral duty to support and protect UK citizens abroad, and this is particularly the case in times of crisis. We also, of course, have heard from the member for Angus and the member for Strangford movingly about their own constituents and their concern. And we know that for much of the time, the support given in embassies or through the FCDO is timely and appropriate. And that is due to the commitment and dedication of FCDO staff and the consulate staff. And I know all members across the House will join me in thanking the staff for their tireless work day in, day out in very stressful circumstances to help our constituents. That said, we do know of some cases where we feel even more could be done, and of course the very well-known case of the member for Hampstead and Kilburn and also the member for Lewisham East, who both still have constituents in Evin prison in Iran, and we know well the story of Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe, but also that of Anusha Ashuri. And there are others, and I know the Minister will be aware of the others as well. And we know that during the pandemic, many of these difficulties were even worse. And I briefly wanted to refer to some of the findings that came out of the work that we did in Parliament before, just to make sure that the Minister is on top of that, because she has changed since that review was held. Obviously, the operation during spring 2020, which we all remember very well as constituency MPs, was considered by the review to be too slow and placed too much reliance on commercial providers, that other countries did appear to be quicker to respond through their embassies and consular arrangements. They seem to be more organised, more speedy, that the Consular Service provided little or no financial support to those who were stranded, and that many citizens were unable to gain access to the information which they needed in a speedy manner. And of course, the failure of the FCDO to provide clear advice on what would happen on arrival to the UK did cause many travellers a great deal of unnecessary anxiety. We know that the FCDO also placed too much reliance on the generic advice, and this approach disadvantaged those with medical conditions and those stuck in remote areas. And finally, that the FCDO had not established a system for logging and recording the location and contact details of UK citizens abroad. It was therefore very troubling to see some familiar themes when the UK British citizens, were trapped in Kabul. Now, we mustn't confuse applicants who were Afghan who wished to apply due to the dreadful situation in Kabul to settle in the UK, but there are even some, I believe, UK citizens who are still finding their way to the UK, and I wonder if the Minister might clarify, how many she thinks are still making their way to the UK from Kabul and, of course, from Pakistan. But that does underline the importance of good administration and basic organisation. And we don't need to rehearse what we heard in the Foreign Affairs Select Committee this week, because we can all look at Hansard to ascertain that. But there are some themes there that the whistleblower did mention, that he felt that only 5% of the people who had written to MPs had had any assistance, and it was clear that some of those left behind, tragically, had been murdered by the Taliban. Now, it's not clear in his transcript, which is about 40 pages long, whether he was referring specifically to Afghan individuals or UK citizens, but in either case, it just shows how important speed is and how important organisation is. And the other point that is very important to make, that is made in the whistleblower's transcript, is that he believes that the FCDO's institutional approach amounted to a failure to abide by the values set out in the Civil Service Code. Now, I'll say no more about that because Parliament is first and foremost about us as members rather than the civil service, but I wonder if the Minister would take that away. The 25-year-old young man who wrote that transcript appeared to be quite traumatised because he had been working, wanting to reply to thousands of emails from members of Parliament. And there are some themes, there are some echoes here around not just the consular cases which are being raised by members, but also around what was talked about in the Foreign Affairs Select Committee on Monday afternoon. And I do hope that the lessons that were needed to be learned in spring 2020 following the repatriation of UK nationals to the UK, and which many of our officers were intimately involved with, would have been learned, and it would suggest that the debate this afternoon, perhaps some of those lessons have not been learned. The other question I had for the Minister was just the legal position. The motion this afternoon's motion refers specifically to the clarification of what a British citizen can expect. And I wonder if the Minister would just outline what she believes the legal position to be is. Can a British citizen expect the translation, the services, medical services and so on? What is that? And that may help us to understand as well as MPs what we can expect to have from the Foreign Office. I know that it's not active government policy at the moment, but at least I don't think it is, otherwise I don't think we'd be seeing these cases. But will the Minister outline whether she or the Foreign Secretary is developing a case whereby there is a legal right for our constituents to expect a service level of service when they're abroad? And how does that compare to other comparable countries? We all want to see an increase of support available to citizens to ensure that when it's needed, it's appropriate. In concluding, Madam Deputy Speaker, I wonder if I could just pick up 2 points. The first one is one that's come out from all the speakers, which is the traumatic nature of this debate. And I wanted to put on record, as we all have today, the importance of our parliamentary staff. And could I thank your team, Madam Deputy Speaker, and the Speaker. Every time we have a crisis in this House, the Speaker writes to our staff and reaches out, and I think that's really powerful, because that is just, I guess, just offering a support for them, because so much of what our staff hear is very, very intense. And I know during the Afghanistan crisis, many of our staff worked day and night and gave so much. So could you pass back to the Speaker's team just how much that means to me as an employer and to all of us as employers? And it was really moving to hear the member for Livingston mention her member of staff, and could she pass from this House to that family how much we appreciate all the hard work she did before she tragically passed away herself. But it isn't easy working for elected members, but we all know that it is so important for our leadership role. The final point I wanted to make was a reflection by the commentator Raphael Baer, who I'm sure the Honourable Lady reads regularly, because he's a foreign policy commentator as well as a number of other things. And he said sometimes he feels in his observing of the current government that there is the thrill of power without the burden of responsibility. And I just wonder whether, I don't mean that in a spirit of anger, I mean it in a spirit of thoughtfulness and contemplation. I think we need to turn it on its head so that we put first the burden of responsibility and put second the thrill of power. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Mr. Amanda Milling.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'd like to start by saying thank you to the Honourable Member for Livingston for securing this debate and congratulating her on securing this debate. And I'd also like to pay tribute to her for all the work that she does as chairman of the All-Party Group, to the All-Party Group for all the work that they do. And also echoing the words of the Shadow Minister in terms of our staff, in terms of her staff and the work they're doing to support the APPG, but also parliamentary staff who have to deal with some very, very difficult cases. Because, as we've heard today, when we have cases of those who are, die when abroad or are detained abroad, these are really difficult. We know this from a number of the cases that have been discussed today and have been discussed in this House on many occasions. So I would like to thank her for all the work and also for our staff. I'm very grateful for colleagues' contributions, and I hope that in my remarks what I will do is cover off a number of the issues that have been discussed today, and are happy to kind of follow up on individual cases as well. In terms of the role of the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, supporting British nationals overseas is absolutely essential. It's a kind of central public service. And over the past decade, we have regularly reviewed and sought to improve the professionalism, scope and form of our services in line with the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations, and by comparing our consular services with those provided by comparable countries. In the recent spending review, the Foreign Secretary has identified consular as one of our 4 key priorities, and we're committed to providing a modern, round-the-clock service, including a wide choice of digital services, which I'll come on to a bit more in a while.
Right honourable friend, give way.
Happy.
Thank you for giving way. I currently have 2 constituents who are imprisoned in the UAE. I am in detailed discussions with the Minister for the Middle East and North Africa, and I appreciate that there's a limit to what you can say or what the Honourable Lady can say at the dispatch box. But can the Honourable Lady, the Right Honourable Lady, reassure me that the FCDO is doing everything in its power to assist my 2 constituents, Mr. Albert Douglas and Mr. Billy Hood, and is treating these cases as the highest priority?
Yes, I will obviously provide that reassurance. Actually, one of the things that I would like to do, I know that my honourable friend has had discussions with my ministerial colleague, but I would happily have further discussions with her following this debate today. In terms of the service, we will continue to provide empathetic support to meet the needs of vulnerable British people and their families, and at the same time helping British people living and travelling abroad to take responsibility for their own safety, and will strengthen the resilience of our consular network and its ability to respond to global crises. When British nationals need assistance overseas, our highly trained consular staff are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Our staff make an assessment of an individual's vulnerability in order to tailor the assistance they receive. We have over 200 consular posts worldwide, with over 700 consular staff across the network. We track and review the quality of our services through both qualitative and quantitative measures, and it's testament to hard work of our staff that the most recent overall satisfaction score remained well over 80%. I'm grateful for honourable members for putting on record their recognition of the hard work of the consular staff. Inevitably, as parliamentarians, often we hear about the most difficult cases, and when constituents may be unhappy with the services they receive. But I want to place on record as well my thanks to the staff, who in the overwhelming number of times have got it right. and were able to provide the support that an individual needed.
Thank you. I'm very grateful for her to give way. She referenced there the most difficult of cases. But it's really important that the FCDO recognises a pattern of events, because my constituent was told that he had to petition to the Attorney General of Thailand to get the case reopened. So I asked the department, can they give me another example of where a UK national has successfully petitioned the Attorney General of Thailand? And they couldn't. It's generic. It's not acceptable. So given that her predecessor and the former Secretary of State refused to meet with me, I wonder if she'd like to meet with me and my constituent.
So I will come on to kind of more broadly the services that we can provide and some of the limitations. But I'm happy to follow up after this debate. Just turning to the number of people we support, we have to support over 20,000 new consular cases, plus around 8,000 long-running cases. And sadly, this figure includes 4,000 deaths and between 40 and 60 homicides. Around 5,000 British nationals are arrested or detained overseas each year, and providing non-judgmental support to prisoners is a large part of our role. And we've received around 500,000 inquiries to our contact centres each year, resolving more than 85% in the first call. Obviously, with COVID-19 over the last 18 months, fewer British nationals have been travelling overseas. However, British nationals still need our support. And despite the variety of local lockdowns and measures, we've continued to provide our core services throughout, adapting to reflect the limits of being able to hold face-to-face meetings. And in 2020, we handled over 3,000 deaths abroad cases, despite many of our staff around the world working through lockdown themselves. Now, colleagues have rightly spoken of the impact that a death may have on, a death overseas can have. And my thoughts go out to all of those mentioned in today's debate and all of those who have lost loved ones.
She talks about statistics and about the number of cases resolved, on first contact, and that is welcome. But it is important, I think, for the House and for those watching to know that amongst those cases are cases of passports, lost passports, people needing new passports, administrative details, not the very difficult casework that we are talking about. And I think in the statistics, perhaps that needs to be separated out, not least just in respect and to be respectful to the families of the loved ones that we are talking about.
Yeah.
The honourable member makes an important point, which is, when we're talking about deaths abroad, we are talking about incredibly complex cases. And hopefully, during the course of my speech, I'll be able to set out, the services we provide and why we provide them in the way that we do, to be able to tailor the service to the situation, to the individual's circumstances. And an unexpected death is deeply upsetting for families concerned, let alone when a death takes place in violent or unexplained circumstances. Anyone who's lost a loved one will want to understand what has happened and why they died. And I recognise this from my own constituency work and, the constituency work of MPs, working hard on behalf of their constituents. My own constituent, Robert Spray, tragically died in Bulgaria whilst in police custody in October 2019. Consular officials have supported the family and continue to request the information from the Bulgarian authorities to support the UK coroner as the family desperately tries to get answers. Our experienced consular staff have detailed knowledge of their country and region and can provide information and the support that helps families navigate the local processes. They do their very best to make sure the wishes of the bereaved families are followed. And this can include from advising on local burial and cremation options or options on transporting the body and personal belongings back to the UK, or providing lists of local and international funeral directors who can assist. We have dedicated teams who provide expertise in particular circumstances, including since 2015 a murder and manslaughter team. As much of our staff want to support families seeking to understand how the death has occurred or to secure justice, there are limits in terms of what the FCDO can do in terms of cases abroad. Investigations into deaths, be it of a natural cause or suspicious circumstances, remains the responsibility of local authorities. We cannot investigate ourselves, nor direct local authorities how to do their job. But I'll take the honourable member.
I understand the point she's making about foreign jurisdictions, and this is something that has been debated very widely across British society, you know, and without getting too specific on a number of very high-profile cases. But there is precedent. There is precedent of this government or the British government, whoever's been in power at the time, putting pressure on foreign authorities and working with them and sending police from the UK to investigate crimes abroad. And families rightly ask, and have asked me on numerous occasions, what makes their loved one different?
I am grateful to the honourable member for the point she's making, and I should have said at the start of the debate as well that I was very grateful to have the opportunity to meet with the honourable member to discuss all of the range of different issues, and actually look forward to working with her and the APPG to see, there are things, as I say, in this instance, remains the responsibility of local authorities. But I'm grateful for the opportunity to work with the APPG, and I will take intervention.
Thank the Minister for let me intervene. I think one of the things that certainly I would like to see and others would like to see is this. While the Minister has outlined the position of the department, I think what my constituent would like to have had whenever it happened, whenever he had the death of his father, was to have a contact, someone to give him advice. We couldn't get that. It's not a criticism, Minister. Just the advice wasn't there. So is it possible to ensure that the advice could be available for the constituents, please?
Thank you. I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for his intervention. And, we always seek to kind of hear feedback from those who you have to use the FCDO services. And I would be more than happy to discuss the particular case that he's referring to after the debate at another point. I think we also have to be clear in terms of what the FCDO can and can't provide in terms of the level of service. And we are not funded to pay for legal, medical or translation costs. But what the consular staff will do is signpoint to the sources of help.
I'm very grateful to the Minister for giving way on that very specific point. If there was actually clarity about what the Consular Service can do, the basics, it would be a start. If we could put it online and have it regularly reviewed.
Hopefully some of the kind of improvements that we are making in terms of the service, and we continue to make, will address some of the points made today. And actually, coming back to one of the points mentioned earlier in terms of lawyer lists, for instance, our posts overseas maintain lists of English-speaking lawyers who are qualified to act in an overseas jurisdiction. And that's published on gov.uk. And we welcome feedback, but we cannot provide specific kind of recommendations. That said, we are looking at how we can make these lists, online lists, more accessible and also easier to navigate. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I was just referring to how consular staff can signpost to sources of help. And for example, we work closely and fund specialist organisations that provide assistance that we cannot, such as counselling, legal advice and support with translation and repatriation. And this includes the Victim Support Homicide Service, Prisoners Abroad, Glasgow and Clyde Rape Crisis Centre and travel care providers and chaplaincies at major UK airports. We publish full details of what the FCDO can and can't do online, support for British nationals abroad. We will publish a refreshed and updated version in next year. I want to just turn to detainees as well. When British nationals are detained overseas, their health and welfare is our top priority. We make every effort to ensure that prisoners receive adequate food, water, medical treatment, and that they have access to legal advice. When we hear about a detention or arrest, our consular staff attempt to contact the individual as soon as possible. How frequently we visit will depend on the nature and the context of the case, but we are aware that for many detainees, our visits are a lifeline, and for some, our staff are the only visitors they will receive. However, we do not and must not interfere in civil and criminal court proceedings. It's right that we respect the legal systems of other countries, just as we expect foreign nationals to respect our laws and legal processes when they're in the UK. But we can, and I am actually going to make progress if you don't mind, because I can, but we can and do intervene on behalf of British nationals where they are not treated in line with internationally accepted standards, or if there are unreasonable delays in procedures. In terms of allegations of torture or mistreatment, we take these incredibly seriously. Although we can't investigate allegations ourselves, with the consent of the individual, we can raise them with local authorities to demand an end to mistreatment and demand that incidents are investigated and the perpetrators are brought to justice. Our priority is always to serve the best interests of the individual. Any decisions on what action we might take in response to allegations of mistreatment are made on a case-by-case basis, only with the individual's consent. I'm
very grateful on the issue of detention abroad and torture. Given that my constituent Jagtar Singh Johal has clearly been clearly evidenced that he has been arbitrarily detained, why won't the Minister's government agree to that position that a UK citizen is being arbitrarily detained by the Republic of India?
I know that we take all, in terms of this particular case, we take all allegations of any human rights violations seriously, and ministers and senior officials have raised Mr Johal's allegations of torture and right to a fair trial with the government of India over 70 times, and recently, most of the Foreign Secretary and my ministerial colleagues. I do want to come on to address the calls for a legal right to consular assistance. As colleagues will know, the UK is party to the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations, which is a multilateral agreement setting out how states will cooperate in the support of their nationals overseas. Our ability to provide consular assistance remains, therefore, at all times dependent on the states respecting the Vienna Convention and must be done in accordance with the laws of that country. Even if a right to consular assistance were enshrined in domestic law, our ability to provide it overseas would continue to remain wholly dependent on the cooperation from host states. It would not help with many of our most complex cases. As I set out earlier, we continually seek to improve our consular services. We welcome feedback and use it to improve our services and provide the best possible assistance. We have learned lessons during the pandemic about how we can operate remotely. We are not complacent about the overwhelmingly positive feedback that we've received, and I acknowledge there are always areas where we can improve. We have a dedicated learning team who ensure that our staff have the knowledge and skills that they need to support British nationals. We have, for instance, included testimony from bereaved families in our training modules about how to support people bereaved through murder and manslaughter. It helps staff understand the perspective from somebody needing that assistance. We also have a robust complaints process for those who feel that we haven't provided the service that they needed. And I want to reiterate, Madam Deputy Speaker, our openness to working with others, particularly the all-party group, to ensure British nationals receive the right support tailored to their circumstances. So to conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, our consular staff at home and abroad work extremely hard to support British nationals in distress and their families, often in difficult circumstances. We take every single consular case seriously. Our trained and expert staff work with empathy and aim to offer the help that's needed, be that advice or practical support. They're not lawyers, they're not medics, police detectives or social workers, but what they try to do is ensure that British people have the information and support they need to help them deal with the situation they face.
Has the Minister concluded? Hannah Bardell to wind up.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm incredibly grateful to all of those who have spoken, the member for North Norfolk of Strangford, and I failed to mention the Kevin Bell Trust in my substantive speech, and I apologise for that, but they are an organisation that we hold in great regard and would like to do some more work with, and I will reach out to him on that. The member for Angus, Western Bartonshire, and the opposition spokesperson, member for Honourable Lady for Hornsey and Wood Green, and they have all spoken passionately about devastating cases in their constituencies. And I have to say to the Minister, gently and kindly, I know that she has come into this role recently and that it's a huge brief and a huge area, and that it's a pre-written speech. We all understand how this works. But I have to say that there will be families at home watching this who will be furious. And that is not in any way to insult her or her staff, but I am concerned that they have not grasped the gravity and the gaps, to be blunt. You know, talking of detailed experience of local staff, I'm sure many do have detailed experience, but I'm afraid that in many cases, and cases that we have heard today, they fail to share that experience, or they fail to have the support and resource to share that experience. She spoke of a service that operates 24 hours a day, 36 days a week. I think there are many, many families that we have met and dealt with that would beg to differ, and if that is their definition of what a service is, because as my honourable friend said, an offer of false empty hope is worse than no hope at all, and I would agree with that. And you know, the level of service and the level of support, I know, is aspirational, and they want to give the very best service, but there is a long way to go, and I am glad that she does want to work with us, because we do. I want to be, as I said, a critical friend, but I think fundamentally, when we talk about the Vienna Convention, we have to remember that the UK has an opportunity to lead the way on this. It's falling far behind, and diplomatic and trade relations, as we well know, play a serious role, and post-Brexit, we are in, I think, a very dangerous and difficult place, and we need to do much, much better for the families of these islands.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
I beg to move this House